On a March morning in 1918, the Lyon train station welcomed a prisoner of war car from Germany. A man called Rick walked out of the car, disheveled. Amid the crowd of people weeping at sudden reunions, Rick seemed dazed and silent. His limbs were intact, but his name was on the list of severely disabled. The doctors who examined him were very somber. This seemingly healthy man could never become a father. Moreover, he seemed to have lost his memory. He didn't know where his home was, or any of his relatives' names. The hospital published a large picture of Rick in the newspaper, hoping to help this poor man find his relatives through the media. Soon, people from all over the country began to arrive. Mothers who lost their sons, brothers who lost their siblings, wives who lost their husbands. Many came and went. And in the end, 2 women remained. One was a good-looking woman with long blonde curls, wearing a white, floor-length gown. She claimed to be Rick's fiancée and brought along a picture of Rick as proof. The doctor, looking from the handsome and happy man in the photo to the stupefied Rick in front of him, was unable to judge. The other woman was a few years older, tugging along a dirty 3 or 4-year-old boy and cradling a 2-year-old girl. She stood in front of the bed, narrating the story of how her husband had gone to the front 2 years ago and never returned. The doctors led the 2 grieving women outside. From the sudden tears in Rick's eyes, they saw hope. Surely, one of these women was his love. As they pored over the photograph the young lady had brought again and again, the nurse suddenly ran out and whispered something to the doctor. He hesitated, slowly returning the photograph to the neat, pretty lady, and turned to embrace the mother of the 2 children. Rick says, "You are his wife." The woman broke down in tears. Hugging her children, the young woman left teary-eyed. A few days later, the silent Rick, the 2 children and their mother went to another French city, Paris. There, not only did they get a new house from the government, Rick also received a generous veteran disability pension each month, enough for the family of 4 to live comfortably. Not long after the end of World War I, France's economy quickly recovered. 10 years later, a public opinion institution prepared to investigate the living conditions of the disabled veterans from the war. And they found Rick in a small town outside of Paris. To their surprise, contrary to the data, this disabled man was not living with his wife and children, but alone in a neat house, making a living selling flowers. When they discovered that Rick had divorced his wife long ago and gave 80% of his war disability pension to his ex-wife and children, they all angrily criticized the heartless woman. But Rick stopped them with a smile. The truth he revealed next stunned everyone. He was not that woman's husband. This fact was realized by both of them the moment he followed her home. The young woman who had left in tears was actually his fiancée. Rick quietly stared at the blooming flower bed. Actually, I didn't have any amnesia. My initial silence was because I couldn't accept the fact that I was physically disabled. "Why did you choose that stranger?" the surveyor wondered. Rick sighed lightly. After the war, the people were suffering under such circumstances. When I saw that woman, whose husband had died on the front lines and had no means of survival, I was filled with sympathy for her and her children. I was already a desperate man at that moment. But at that moment, I suddenly felt that I could still be useful. I could use my disability allowance to help this woman and her 2 children get through their difficulties. As for my fiancée, judging from her clothes, her life was still bearable. Most importantly, this innocent woman deserved a fresh start, so I'd rather have her believe that her fiancé had died rather than being her burden. Everything happened as Rick foresaw. The widowed woman and her children no longer needed to worry about food and clothing. At this time, Rick opened his heart to the woman, convinced her to accept the divorce, and gave her 80% of his disability pension. Then, Rick left Paris and came to this small town to become a florist. Rick's deeds deeply affected those from the public opinion institution who were preparing to propagate this silent hero's story. But Rick stopped them. "It's nothing but a belated farewell. I don't want to disturb their lives anymore."